Thank you very much indeed, Jane, and thank you for inviting me along this evening, and particular thanks to Kerry and Jane for their presentation. I'm intensely aware when talking about our visit that it was a brief visit, and that unlike Kerry and Jane and many other people here, I can't speak with the authority of actually having spent as much time as they have actually engaging with the reality of life in Palestine, and particularly in occupied territories. But I can confirm that what we experienced the brief time we were there mirrors precisely what Jane and Gary have been describing to you this evening. First of all, the friendship and the hospitality and the warmth of the Palestinian people was overwhelming. And secondly, what they suffer and the reality of occupation is devastating. We actually went, as a result of the discussion that some of us were having about actually the situation in Gaza. Potentially we couldn't actually go and see that for ourselves. But arising from that, talking with some friends from the Federation of Muslim Organisations, we did feel at least we could go and get some flavour of the reality of the West Bank. And perhaps begin to put into context some of the things that were happening not so far away from that in Gaza. I have to say it was a visit, all being somewhat brief, 3 or 4 days, one that was, I think, as James was describing some initial contacts, one that was profoundly changing in my attitude and my sensitivities to this. I went, of course, anticipating that the Israeli propaganda would at least have some superficial substance. That they would, as they seek to portray themselves, want to maintain the facade of being a democratic country. That they would want to maintain the facade of being governed by the rule of law. That they would want to maintain the facade of being motivated by a fear for their existence. None of those did they even pretend. The reality is that, of course, none of those have any substance at all, and they don't even pay lip service to them. I went with 3 colleagues, in fact. One other councillor, 2 other councillors, but 2 of the 3 of us, 2 of the 4 of us were Muslim. And of course, as you can imagine, the hassle started long before we got there. We found ourselves inexplicably moved from a Brussels Air flight while we got to Brussels into the hands of El Al. We found ourselves, of course, once in the hands of ML, our Muslim colleagues particularly, subject to intense harassment, quite inappropriate questioning, and a lot of pretty nasty pressure. It was very evident what was happening right from the start, but what, of course, wasn't evident until we actually got there was that what we were getting was just a flavour of it. We weren't getting the reality of it, we were just getting a flavour of it. What we were getting was prejudice, discrimination, unfairness that was superficial compared with what Palestinian people have to put up with every day. For them, it's a fact of everyday life. We met, as I say, some remarkable people, all very generous in hospitality, but some very brave people. A woman who had been made a refugee in 1948, living now still quite central in Jerusalem, now with half her house taken over by settlers. Some pretty nasty people, with some pretty nasty dogs. An elderly woman now, of course, subject every day to the harassment of the people who've taken over half of her house, and incredibly courageous. She wasn't going to move. And she made it very clear that they had to drag her out, and it was quite clear that they were quite prepared to do that. And one couldn't help sympathising and feeling that what was happening there was just appalling. A man in Hebron who had a nasty bunch of settlers take over most of his back garden, literally most of his back garden. He'd been in prison, he'd suffered beatings, he had found himself confined to just a few streets because he said the imprisonment if he moves outside of that, and yet remarkably determined, remarkably hospitable, and one couldn't help but feel somebody who was actually heroic in their response to what they were facing. We saw, of course, not just these people, but we saw the reality of the apartheid war, so-called security war. Of course, the reality is, and it's immediately evident once you see it, that it's not about security. People get around it, people get over it, people get through it. If it was about security, none of those things would be possible. If anybody actually wants to go and cause mayhem in the centre of Jerusalem, they can do that. What that wall is about apartheid. It's about keeping people apart. And it is about devastating the Palestinian culture, and the Palestinian people, and the Palestinian economy. And what is remarkable is that so many remain so determined despite all of that. In Hebron, we saw the effect of the way in which the Israeli military has split the town. Split the town down the main road. One side bustling, thriving. The other side, because there's a few settlers down there, illegal, supposedly, settlers, the whole of the area and the whole of the economy of the area has been devastated, killed. We saw, while we're there, two things that I think were very much reflective of what Jen Kerrigan said, that were among many others we saw, but I just really wanted to tell you these two anecdotes. There was, in a sense, as I say, just part of the trivial everyday life of the Palestinians who were there, but for us it was very telling indeed. We were just going down the street effectively behind the area where the roadblock is, where the settlers were being protected. And a bunch of settler kids, about 8 of them, it must have been about, 10, 11, 12-year-olds, were taunting two Palestinian lads. And the two Palestinian lads were being remarkably restrained. But eventually, one of them actually slashed out like that. I does this with teachers, you might see it on the playground. You know that what you do, if you're a teacher and you saw the playground, is to get the kids apart, try to find out what's happening, and you try and mediate in some way, and tell them, unacceptable behaviour. That wasn't what happened, of course. What happened was, a couple of the settler lads ran up the road, and 3 Israeli soldiers with guns came down, and immediately took the 2 Palestinian lads on one side. They were aware we were watching, okay, and they talked with them. We walked on, came back about 10 minutes later. One of them had been arrested. One of the Palestinian lads had been arrested. Came back half an hour later, and his family had been arrested as well. It's small, it's trivial, it's part of their everyday life, but it's the reality of it. And I don't doubt that is just typical of how things are. A bit later, another anecdote. There's that roadblock down the end. The Israelis who were planning it decided they were going to take a break. They were going to close it for a bit. They weren't saying how long. Elderly woman, obvious breathing difficulties, wanted to get across to get to the clinic on the other side. Yeah, I mean, you could see the gap through. There was no reason why she couldn't just be way through. So, I mean, she was no threat to anybody, of course she wouldn't. They made her sit in the baking sun, breathing difficulties. Clinic on the other side, they made her sit in the baking sun with no knowledge at all of when she might be allowed to go and see the doctor. Any pretense that was about security is ludicrous, because we walked 100 yards up the road, past the Israeli soldiers who told us we weren't supposed to do it. We went down to the back gardens and around the security. We're a fit, able-bodied. We could walk around. They knew we could walk around. It wasn't about security, it was about suppression. I could, give many more examples, but what became evident, even on that brief visit, is that the presence of those Israelis on the West Bank is about power, it's about control, it's about a land grab, it's about devastating the Palestinian economy, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with security. I could talk about some of the settlers. James, described some of them there. We saw some of them in action as well, and they were some of those we saw. Actually, some of those you saw, Jane. They really are motivated by a right-wing ideology that is appalling and is racist, and there is no other way of describing it. We've obviously now come back and inevitably asked ourselves, well, so what can we do about it? And one thing we can do about it is come talk here, give my support to all I can to the Friends of Bethlehem, and to say particularly in our visit, it was that Bethlehem where I was most distressed. It must be typical of other communities across the West Bank, but that wall in Bethlehem is particularly poignant, and the way in which the local people have sought to find a grim humour in it, to keep their morale up despite it, and as this particular project is to make sure that the children have some hope for the future, is astonishing. It's really quite remarkable and very inspiring. I think I'm intending, I've got a few slides myself, just really feels like giving a bit of a plug for it. We're doing an event with the Federation of Muslim Organisations on Thursday, and I think it'll be available on their website as to where it is, but I do intend to talk a bit longer and to give some of the slides to illustrate some of the anecdotes. So I'm intensely aware that I don't have the experience or the knowledge of some of those who are here, but I do know the evidence on my own eyes. And I do know that what I saw was nasty. What I saw was apartheid. What I saw was racist. And what I saw is something that we must all struggle to combat. And we must all seek to support those who are victims. Thank you very much.
Thanks to Peter for bringing us up to date on what you've just seen in the last few weeks, and for everything that you've said, and certainly everything that you describe. I know all of us who've been there can endorse everything that you've said. I've only been to Hebron once. I'm too scared to go back after what I saw the first time. So utterly terrifying, the amount of protection that the settlers are given by the Israeli army. They're not there to protect the indigenous population at all. So thank you for bringing us up to date like that.